Now, on Wednesday, the Russian President Vladimir Putin embarked on a one-day lightning tour to the Middle East. The agenda? Two key meets, first with UAE's President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan and the second with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. The two met in Abu Dhabi. Putin was accompanied by 4 fighter jets, and we are talking about the UAE President and the Russian President's first meeting. The UAE jets greeted the Kremlin chief with a flypast trailing the colors of Russia's flag in Abu Dhabi, Putin's first stop. Before this meeting, soldiers on horseback and with camels lined Putin's arrival route, with Russian and Emirati flags also hanging from lampposts. Now, it should be noted that Vladimir Putin is making this trip to the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia in the hope of shoring up support in the Middle East from two major oil producers which are allied to the United States, as his military campaign in Ukraine is also grinding on. Now, both countries are key trading partners for Russia, and we are talking about UAE and Saudi Arabia. Interestingly, UAE and Saudi Arabia have remained neutral in the entire Ukraine conflict, refusing to adopt Western-led sanctions against the country for its invasion of Ukraine. Wednesday's tour marked Putin's first trip to the region since before the coronavirus pandemic and the military campaign, and as he faces an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court over the fighting in Ukraine. It should be noted that neither Saudi Arabia nor the UAE have signed the ICC founding treaty, meaning they do not face any obligation to detain Putin over the warrant accusing him of being personally responsible for the abductions of children from Ukraine during his war in the country. Now, Putin's visit coincides also with the Ukrainian President Zelensky's unexpectedly cancelling a key US Senate briefing amid Ukraine war funding row. Several Republican senators walked out of a classified briefing on Ukraine on Tuesday as it descended into a row over the border crisis after President Volodymyr Zelensky unexpectedly cancelled a video link appearance to appeal for continued US funding. The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer announced that Zelensky had been prevented from taking part by a last-minute hiccup, but Schumer pressed ahead with the briefing anyway, only for the proceedings to turn into a war of words. Now, shifting our focus back to Putin's two significant meetings, let's also listen in to what the Russian president had to say.
Today, thanks to your position, our relations have reached an unprecedented high level. Indeed, the United Arab Emirates is Russia's main trading partner in the Arab world. A number of large projects in the oil and gas sector are being implemented. We also cooperate those OPEC Plus. We cooperate internationally. The United Arab Emirates make a huge contribution to stabilizing the situation in the world by being a non-permanent member of the Security Council. Of course, we will discuss with you the situation in the hottest spots. First of all, of course, in the Arab-Palestinian-Israel conflict. UAE is Russia's largest trading partner in the Gulf and its biggest Arab investor. We are pleased to continue working with you on strengthening these relations and expanding areas of cooperation towards more growth and development in the coming period, especially in priority areas of development, particularly innovation, energy, infrastructure, and new technologies. There are also strategic talks between Russia and the Gulf Cooperation Council, and this further strengthens our relations and expands areas of cooperation, consultation, and exchange of viewpoints, whether on bilateral relations or regional and international affairs.
How significant is Vladimir Putin's visit to these two Middle Eastern countries? We'll try and get in a sense of perspective, and for that, let me introduce my guest. I'm joined in by Anatol Livan, who's the director of the Eurasia program at the Quincy Institute. Many thanks to you, Anatol, for joining in here on CNN News 18. Now, at a time when the UAE is hosting the COP28 climate summit, that's also, as we know, is being attended by some of the tallest world leaders, what is the larger geopolitical messaging of this meet between Putin and UAE's President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan?
I think there are several messages. I mean, one is that the Western campaign to isolate Russia has largely failed. You have as you said, I mean, US allies, including Turkey, Georgia, and the Gulf states, which are continuing fully to trade with Russia and to invest in Russia and to accept Russian investment. There is also, so this is an important trip for Putin to demonstrate that while, of course, Russia is isolated now from the West, it is not isolated from the wider world. Then there is cooperation, of course, in oil and gas. I think that both Russia and the UAE and Saudi Arabia now have a common interest in pushing back against Western pressure over abandoning or moving towards abandoning fossil fuels, which are, of course, vital to both countries. And I think that this meeting is yet another blow to COP28 and to hopes that oil producers could be persuaded to reduce their production. I fear that is simply not going to happen. And then I think it's also a way, to a limited extent, for Saudi Arabia and the UAE to signal their displeasure with unconditional United States support for Israel in the Gaza war, which of course has caused tremendous anger in the Arab world and in their populations. So this meets
Right.
several key objectives on both sides.
Anatole, it's very interesting that you mentioned in your second point that oil being that crucial bone of contention, because we've seen disagreements between Russia and Saudi Arabia over oil production levels. They, of course, Saudi Arabia wanted greater cuts. In fact, during the OPEC Plus meet, Saudi's energy minister said that OPEC Plus also wants more assurances from Moscow to reduce their fuel exports. Is oil also a bone of contention for Russia and Saudi Arabia now?
To a limited extent, yes. I mean, there have often in the past been disagreements over the oil price. And of course, that is very much because Saudi Arabia, still more the UAE to a degree, can cut their production in order to try to keep prices high. Whereas especially during the Ukraine war, Russia simply has to produce in order to sustain its budget. Because now more than half of the Russian state budget is going to the military to sustain the Ukraine war. So yes, I mean there are disagreements, but at the same time there is a fundamental agreement that fossil fuel production remains critical and must be defended.
Fair enough. Anatole, my last question. Both visits by Putin will now be followed by Vladimir Putin also hosting the Iranian president in the Kremlin on Thursday. Are these spate of meetings an attempt by the Russian president to boost Moscow's profile as a power broker in the Middle East and challenge Washington, casting the war as a failure of US diplomacy?
Yes, very much so. But I think also a signal to Washington that, so far Russia has been very restrained over the Gaza war. It has, of course, criticized Israel to some extent, but there's no evidence that it has actually been supporting Israel's enemies. So I think Moscow wants to send a message to Washington. Look, if we wanted to, we could make life much, much more difficult for you in the Middle East. So maybe you should start thinking about compromising with us over Ukraine.